So I didn't want to have advertising on my show. So I thought, if I'm going to monetize it, I'm going to have to think of something a little bit different. I knew that there would be some that listen to the show that would potentially turn into customers. But I also knew it's going to be complex because when you listen to a podcast, you're generally out and about. You're driving. That's when I listen to them. You're driving, or you're going for a run, or you're going for a walk, or I don't know, however other people listen to podcasts. But you're generally not sitting in front of your computer, and you're not sitting there going, I'm going to click on a link, or I'm going to go to a website they're telling me right now. You've got to remember to do that. So it's a tricky little journey around that. So I make sure that people subscribe, and I make sure that they sign up for my newsletter. That way I can market to them.
Welcome to another episode of Listeners to Leads, where I'm helping podcasters launch and maintain a lead-generating show. I'm your host, Alicia Galati, the CEO and head podcast strategist behind Galati Media, a full-service podcast management company. On this show, you'll hear my guests and I discuss everything it takes to launch a successful podcast and keep it running. If you're ready to get leads, land speaking gigs, and create deeper connections with your audience through your podcast, then this is the show for you. Today on the show, we have Vince Warnock, and I'm so excited for you guys to hear this conversation. I was laughing practically the whole time. Vince is such an incredible and genuine human being. He has a show where he has gotten clients off of his show. He's gotten clients from guests who have been on his show. And then we shared a few horror stories of guest pitches that he has received, even some guests that he's had on where he has had to say, nope, this is not going to work. We are not going to have you on the show. I'm sorry. And how he navigated those conversations. This episode is absolute gold. I'm so excited to introduce you to my new friend, Vince, who's also a massive Star Wars fan. So win-win all around. Welcome, Vince. I am so excited for today's conversation. We have Vince. And Vince, if you could just tell everyone who you are, what you do, and a little bit about your podcast.
Okay. Oh my goodness. So once upon a time in a galaxy far from, I'm sorry. I am Vince Warnock. I am the host of the Chasing the Insights podcast. I'm also an author and a marketing coach. I'll give you a quick background on my journey of how I got to do my podcast. But essentially, I've had a really eclectic career. I spent most of my career being in and out of both entrepreneurship and corporate, creating and failing a lot of companies early on, then creating and selling a number of companies later on, which is much nicer. But also found myself as an on-air announcer at one of our largest radio stations here. Being an on-air announcer was one of my dream jobs ever since I was 7. I remember I built a crystal radio set and I was listening to these people and I'm like, wait a minute, get my head around this. They are getting paid to play music and to hang out with cool people and to joke around with an audience. I mean, this is so cool. So I finally got to do it and I got to be on our biggest radio station here. And it was exactly what I thought, except for one factor, the lack of pay. It was such a poorly paid job. I'm like, I can't sustain this. But I've always loved that. And that's kind of drew me to one of my passions, which is podcasting. I'm addicted to podcasts. I love listening to podcasts. So at some point I thought, you know what? I'm going to have to do this at some point. I'm going to have to get back to that days of audio, get back to the days of actually being able to speak on air and launch my podcast. At the time, too, I had just come off the back of creating and selling one of my largest companies. So that was a 8-figure exit. It was a high-growth tech startup called Common Ledger. We grew that over 3.5 years and then exited that. And then I found myself joining the team at Signal Insurance. I became the chief marketing officer there. And that was a crazy journey. Like, seriously, on paper, everything looked spectacular. Like, I was getting the results. We doubled the revenue of a Fortune 100 company in the time that I worked there. We took them from 7th largest insurer to 2nd largest insurer. And the work that I specifically did was around online, where I said to them, look, I really think these online channels are going to be beneficial. Everyone said, nope, you can't do that. People don't buy life insurance or medical insurance online, but it doesn't work that way. And I'm like, hold my beer. Let me show you what I can do. And I took online sales from pretty much nothing through to about 48% of our revenue. On paper, it was spectacular. I was getting the recognition that I needed. I published my first book when I was there. I was winning all the awards. In fact, it got recognized by Adobe as one of the top 50 marketers in the world. That was a very humbling thing. To be fair, to this day, I still think that one day they're going to go, wait, we meant the other Vince Warnock, because I'm sure there's another one out there somewhere. But on paper, everything looked amazing, seriously. And I had the biggest office in the place, second only to the CEO, of course. And I remember sitting in that office going, wow, this is such an incredible job. And I'm getting such good results. and yet I'm utterly miserable. And I realized I was feeling really, really unfulfilled. Part of that is because when you're at a C-suite level executive, essentially everybody to you is a data sign or a dollar sign. So a data point or a dollar sign, and you're like, well, that's not me. I was essentially acting as the CEO, a CMO. You know, I was in the role of a CMO, but I wasn't being myself at all. And people are really, really important to me. And I'm driven by helping people. I'm driven by wanting people to succeed. So that's when I realized I needed to make a change. Around November or December of 2019, I remember having some very, very awkward conversations with my CEO saying, I think I need to leave. And she's like, what? What are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to be a full-time author. She goes, but do you know how much we pay you? And I was like, yes, I know. It's not about the money. She goes, I don't understand, Vince. And I'm thinking, and that's partly why I'm leaving. And it was just, I realized that culture was not me. Nothing wrong with that culture. The people there are amazing. I really love the place. I love the people, but it just wasn't for me at all. So made the decision, left there in January 2020, pre-COVID, which was really handy. The goal was to just write my next book. But of course, when you're ADHD, writing a book full-time drives you mental. So I lasted about, I think I say about a week, but it was probably about 3 or 4 days. I started going a bit crazy. So I started writing more than one book. In fact, I've got 4 books getting published this year. And then, of course, I launched my podcast and then accidentally found myself as a marketing coach because everyone I was talking to for my book, well, COVID hit and they all just said, we can't help you. We have no revenue coming in. We don't even, we're seriously stressing out, man. We've got all the same overheads, no revenue. We don't even know if we're going to exist in 2 months' time. When you're passionate about entrepreneurship, and I'm very passionate about entrepreneurship, that's heartbreaking. I remember turning to my wife and she goes, you can't let this go, can you? And I went, nah. She goes, you're going to have to help, aren't you? And I went, yeah. So I said to them all, look, let me come alongside you. Let me see what you can do. And they had nothing to lose, so they all said yes. Turned them all to profitable in a very short amount of time during lockdown, which was amazing. We had no casualties. But better than that, I actually tripled the revenue of one of them and doubled the revenue of another 3. They had no idea what they were sitting on. It was simple tweaks that made it really profitable. So then I found myself with this weird sense of this bubbling on the inside and go, I don't know what's happening here. This is crazy. And realize, I feel fulfilled. That's been a long time, my friend. So then from there now, honestly, this is my life. My life is just podcasting, which is one of my insane passions. I just love podcasting so much. I've got to meet legitimately some of the coolest people in the world through running a podcast. I've got to make money off of having a podcast, something I didn't think I could do. I've generated a lot of clients off my podcast. But even some of the people that I've interviewed on my show have legitimately gone on to be some of my best friends in the world. And I don't say that lightly either. They're just some of the most amazing humans. And we're on calls 2 to 3 times a week, just encouraging each other, supporting each other. And it's the side of podcasting that nobody talks about. So I've been incredibly blessed. I just love it.
All of that, right? It's so good. First, I have to say that I love that you started off your intro with in a galaxy far, far away. Because if you look at any of my brand photos, I've got my Darth Vader t-shirt on and yeah. Yeah. And
that's why you and I were instantly going to get on.
Yes. Yeah. People can't see your background, but you have so much Star Wars paraphernalia and I'm extremely jealous right now because my background's very feminine and it's some crystals and this rosy draft and that's great, but now I need to change everything to Star Wars. Yeah.
Well, if it makes you feel even worse, so obviously I've got all the Star Wars paraphernalia behind me, including my custom lightsaber. So happy with that. We've only been in this house since February. And we haven't even fully moved in here yet. And I realized in our garage, there's a whole pile of stuff we haven't unpacked, including a whole pile more of my Star Wars stuff. So at some point I'm going to get it out, but I'm worried I have no room left in the office here. I'm like, And my wife has clearly said to me, look, I don't mind you. The office is yours. You put Star Wars wherever you want in there. It's not a problem, but it's not going in our living room and it's not going in the bedroom. And I'm like,
oh, fine, I guess, if I must.
Yeah.
It's so great.
I tried to have the Star Wars pillowcases, but she just looked at me and went, that's not happening. I went, yeah, okay. I've learned to take direction.
Yes. That's so awesome. All right. So you've said some great things there. We recently had someone on who also has ADHD. Funny enough, I'm pretty sure she's also from New Zealand, which is bananas. So small world, wow. Right? And so she talked a little bit about managing her podcast as well as being a podcast producer while having ADHD and some things that she does. Do you have any tips or tricks that you can share with us real quick, kind of jumping off of that past episode.
Make sure you got support is the main thing. Never do these kind of things alone. You've got to have a team. So all of the things that would cause me constant distraction and cause me like tension and things, like i.e. doing really administrative kind of things, make sure you outsource that to somebody else. But the other aspect on there is just being very aware of that. So I approach every episode. I make sure my episodes are 30 to 40 minutes long. I don't go for an hour. I don't go for 2 hours like some podcasts do, because there's no way I'm going to be able to last that long. Like seriously, I would go crazy. I would go off on all these different tangents. But I approach every episode by researching the person I'm talking to and then getting hyper curious about them. So I'm going, okay. I use my ADHD as a weapon. Essentially, I go, right, that's it. I'm going to use this to just dig into all the things they're saying. Like, what do I want to know about this? Because chances are, if I want to know it about their journey and about what they're teaching, my audience want to know that as well.
Yes, 100%. That's so good. Thank you for sharing that. All right, on to what we're talking about today. You had mentioned monetizing your podcast and that you've gotten clients from your podcast. I love the part where you said about some of your best friends have been on your podcast. Like, I totally agree with that. Like, podcasting does create such a connection between guest and host, and taking that connection further. A few of the people that I've recently interviewed, I'm like, so we're officially best friends. That's it. I'll probably never meet you in real life, but that's okay. We're best friends. So I totally agree.
Literally, word for word, that almost happened on one of them, where they turned around and I was talking with this guy, Austin, and we were 5 minutes into the conversation. He goes, hey, did we just become best friends? And I'm like, I really think we did. I really think we did. And he's like, oh my God. And so now he's sent me details. Like, honestly, if I'm going to New York, I've already got a place to stay there. In Florida, I have about 4 people fighting over where me and my wife are going to go and stay when we go there. And these are all just guests from the podcast. It's just crazy.
Oh, small world, right? So let's talk monetizing your podcast. First, did you go into it with the idea of, I'm going to monetize this? Because I find that a lot of people, they don't always do that. Yeah. And then they have to try to monetize after the fact. So I'm curious if you went into it with like, I'm going to monetize this. You put your heart and your soul into your show. And I want to help you reach all of those potential listeners out there. That's why I'm excited to announce my upcoming podcast marketing workshop. It's about giving you practical tools to grow your audience. You'll learn the secrets to getting your podcast discovered, attracting your dream listeners, and boosting those download numbers. This workshop will be hosted live with a replay available on April 30th. You can sign up by going to galatimedia.com/workshop. Let's grow our podcasts together.
Kind of and kind of not. So when I went into it, I knew I had very specific goals that I wanted to achieve. And one of them was, I know that I have a huge reputation in the marketing industry. You know, getting named as one of the top 50 by Adobe, you get noticed for that kind of thing. But I knew in entrepreneurship, yes, I've created and sold companies, but that doesn't mean I'm known in entrepreneur circles. And I know if I'm going into this kind of arena, if I'm going to, kind of play in the sandpit essentially, then I need to position myself as a thought leader. And I thought a podcast is a really good way to do that. You have a platform, you're aligned with the people that you get on the show. In fact, like, just if we break it down and get crass for a moment, when people hear you interviewing like John Lee Dumas, for example, and they hold John Lee Dumas in high esteem, then they go, oh, Vince and John are on the same level. So they immediately make that connection with themselves, whether it is or not. So it does position you as a thought leader. Going in as having that as a goal, that was a giant big tick. Done. That was awesome, and definitely achieved that. I also knew I was going to generate some revenue from the show. So I wanted to make sure I was at least covering my costs. The thing for me is I don't want to do advertising. Well, at the moment, I don't want to do sponsorship deals. And the main reason is because I never want to use my platform to push something that I don't believe in fully. And I want to be really transparent when I do as well. This is why affiliate schemes, I've nothing wrong with affiliates at all. In fact, I highly recommend it as a marketing channel and as a marketing approach. But the reality is for me, I want to make sure that people know I have integrity around these things. So actually approaching it and saying, hey, I recommend this. I'm not an affiliate. That's really powerful. So I didn't want to have advertising on my show. So I thought if I'm going to monetize it, I'm going to have to think of something a little bit different. I knew that there would be some that listen to the show that would potentially turn into customers. But I also knew it's going to be complex because when you listen to a podcast, you're generally out and about. You know, you're driving. That's when I listen to them. you're driving, or you're going for a run, or you're going for a walk, or I don't know, however other people listen to podcasts, but you're generally not sitting in front of your computer.
Right.
And you're not sitting there going, I'm going to click on a link, or I'm going to go to a website they're telling me right now. You've got to remember to do that. So it's a tricky little journey around that. So I make sure that people subscribe, and I make sure that they sign up for my newsletter. That way I can market to them. And I've generated some really good clients from that. In fact, one of my favorite clients ever literally heard me interviewing a guest I had on the show. And that guest was talking about their tragic backstory and sharing a lot of the stuff that they had gone through. And then they turned around. Now, the guest was actually a good friend of mine anyway. We've become good friends. But she turned around and she goes, oh, my goodness, Vince, I just realized I've never shared that part of my story publicly before. She goes, oh, you have such a way of drawing that out of me, and then laughed. Now, I made sure, of course, that she was okay with me actually sharing that on the episode, and she was. She just had to ring her mum and let her know, this is going public. But this woman heard that conversation, and she heard her say, you have a way of drawing that out of me. So she reached out to me and said, look, I've heard your interview with Alex. I would love to talk with you. Can I tell you my story? Now, I thought she was pitching to be on the show. I said, look, not a problem. Let's do this. And when she came to me, she said, she basically told me about the business she was building, which is an OBM business. And she was hitting the ceiling all the time where she didn't want to get visible because she was petrified that if people found out about her past, they would judge her. And her past is she had grown up in abuse. She'd been sexually and physically abused. She had had drug addiction as part of her childhood and things as well. And then she ended up getting to the point where she made some really dumb decisions, as she says, made some dumb decisions and became a convicted felon. Now, all of that's behind her. She's a totally different person. And in fact, all of that you can actually track back to what she was living in at the time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, any sane person would look at that and go, I can't judge you based on this, you know? But she was really, really worried about it. So I said to her, well, instead of hiding from your past, instead of hiding from what you've been through, why don't you make it part of your brand and make it part of your story? Why don't you embrace it? And she goes, because I'm scared. And I said, well, I will talk you through. And I talked her through, I've got this method called the BEATS method, which helps them to understand their journey and their story and bring that into their personal brand. And when we went through this, she ended up she became a client of mine, joined my program. About a week into the program, she announced to everybody, guess what? I'm closing down my business. And we're all like, oh, wait, that's not good. And she goes, no, it's good. And the reason it was good is because she was closing down the business to focus on doing what she now knows she's called to, and that's helping people like her, helping people that have been through incarceration to get a second chance in life. Since then, honestly, she's been one of my star pupils. She's launched her own podcast. She has become an international best-selling author. She's just been featured on a number of different magazines, and I'm like, damn it, slow down. You're overtaking me. Right. This is not fair.
The student doing better than the teacher.
Yeah. Which of course is the dream, you know. But all of that came from her listening to a podcast episode. So that has happened, and I've generated money from that. The other thing that I've done is I knew I wanted a way for people to be able to support the show, but I don't want to just set up some kind of donation thing because I know I'm adding value to them. It just feels a bit one-sided. Yeah. So I set up like a Patreon style thing. I call it the Insider Club. And essentially I do audio only podcasts, but I record the video and I put the videos into the Insider Club. But I also, any masterclasses I'm teaching, I put them in there and I put downloads and resources and stuff. So basically anyone can subscribe for $10 a month. They can sign up and they get access to this additional exclusive content. So it was a way to kind of supplement it. And the way I sell it is simple. It's a great way to support the show, but also to get access to this content that's going to help move the needle for your business. You know, if you're charging $10 a month and you get a few hundred people signing up to that, that's a nice little secondary income that comes in, you know? Yeah. And then the other thing that happened was, and this is the bit that really did surprise me, and this was never my intention going in, right, was the guests that I have on the show. And I've had some pretty high profile entrepreneurs on the show, but some of them have actually turned around and become clients of mine. This was never an intention, and I think that's probably why it's happened that way, is because I've never gone out there trying to sell to them or anything like that. I just try and add value to them and make them look good, you know? And in fact, I remember one of my biggest clients, actually, we did the show, I interviewed them on the show. She was talking about she's launching a new business. She's got like 4 businesses already, launching another business. And then at the end of the show, we kind of wrapped it up. And at the very end, I do this thing. It's an affirmations piece where I just directly talk to the audience and remind them that they're awesome, remind them that they're entrepreneurs and that's something special. So I was talking about that and she burst into tears. And I'm like, what do you do? Like, and she was on mute, but I'm thinking, do I stop this now and cut it and edit it later? I try not to edit because I'm lazy, you know, so I just don't want to do it all in one take. So I quickly wrapped it all up and then I was like, oh, are you okay? And she's like, oh, no, I'm fine. She goes, but you have no idea the last few weeks that I've just been through. And she's launching this new business and she that morning had got up and just went, why am I doing this? She goes, I don't know why I'm doing this anymore. I'm fed up with this. She was working with 2 different coaches and she was not getting what she needed from them. And she was really dissatisfied and disillusioned. And she goes, but that one little thing you shared there connected me with my why. And she goes, you've made me remember why I want to do this and why I'm so passionate about it. She goes, I really thank you. And I was like, look, not a problem. I thought that was really sweet. And then we got to talking about her business and she told me a couple of the challenges she's having. So I gave her some ideas and some concepts that she was like, oh, yes, I'm going to try these. And then about a week or 2 later, she contacted me and said, look, can I jump on a call? I said, yep. She goes, I have to tell you, my husband's told me off. And I'm like, where's this going? She goes, husband's told me off. And she goes, because I've been looking for a new coach because I realized the 2 coaches who are very high profile aren't the people that are going to get me to where I need to go. So I've been interviewing all these ones and I've been so damn frustrated at it. None of them align with me at all. And my husband just said, will you shut up about these people? It's just like, this one's not good, this one's, and yet you won't stop talking about the podcast. He's a coach. Why don't you reach out to him? And I was like, oh, it was completely unexpected. And then she went, so here's what's happening. You are now my coach. I don't care how much it costs. Send me through the details and we need to start next week. And I remember sitting there, I was so taken back. I had no, it's not often that I'm speechless, but I just turned around and said, yes, ma'am. That was all I could think of. But that kind of thing, I didn't expect at all. But when as you know yourself, when you're hosting a podcast, you actually do connect with the people quite deeply. And, they get to see you and you get to see them in your kind of natural environment, sort of. And as a result, you form really good relationships with them. And that has led to a number of them actually being my one-to-one clients, which has been amazing.
Yes. Obviously, this show is called Listeners to Leads. So all of the examples that you just gave are directly related to just being an authentic person, showing up,
yes,
being a good host, being a good guest. All of those things they funnel into when you show up, people hear it. Because you can hear the energy in people on just audio. You don't have to see them. And when you were saying where people listen to their podcasts, I always mention the shower because for the longest time, that was the only place I could listen to podcasts was in the shower because there was just too many small children running around. I only have 2, but it's still too many sometimes. Where they're running around driving me crazy and I can't focus. So the shower was the only time where I could listen to my podcast. Yes. You get into people's lives and in their daily actions and they connect with you on a deeper level as a host and then as a guest. And then, it's so good. So speaking of being a guest, you have some war stories and horror stories I'm so excited to listen to.
Oh, my goodness.
So if you could just share them.
Okay. So there's basic principles of being a good guest, right? And these aren't rocket science. Seriously. It's there's the simple things like turn up on time. I've had a number of people that turn up late and you can be forgiven for, certain amount of time. But for someone, I had one guest who had booked 3 times in a row and not shown up to any one of them. And then about a day later, I gone, I'm so sorry about that. Something came up. And I'm like, and you couldn't just message me? I sat there for 20 minutes wondering if you were going to show up and then just cancelled, So that part was a little bit annoying. Now, ironically, that person, when I did do the episode with them, it turned out to be a really good one. So I was a bit annoyed about that. It was like, damn, they're actually a really good guest from that perspective. It's just the punctuality thing. Duh.
Yeah.
But the other thing is just be respectful. And it's the same principle whether you're a host or a guest. Your job is really simple. It is to show respect to the other person and to make them look good.
Yeah.
So actually take the time to do that. I always talk my guests up. I always make sure that they're basically, I tell them, my job is to make you look amazing. Seriously, if you don't look amazing at the end of this, I have failed. So I will, that's the approach that I take. But being a good guest is the same thing as well. It's actually acknowledging, hey, I love this podcast. I'm a fan of this podcast. You're an amazing host, and I love what you've brought out here. I love the work you do. It's things like that. Be genuine, obviously, with it. If you really don't like the work that they do, maybe don't lie. But it's just about being respectful. And the goal is you're trying to build a rapport with the host. Man, you want to talk horror stories. Okay, so I do a pre-call with everybody. So if they want to be on my show, I say, not a problem, but we have to do a pre-call. So a 30-minute pre-call. I'm really just looking to see that there's a good rapport between this. And the only times I've never done that, it has backfired on me. There were 2 people who it was like, okay, this is going to be really awkward, but they couldn't get the time. So let's just book this in. And one of them, you will never hear that episode ever, because we jumped on the call and it was shocking. He had no EQ at all. he was really abrupt with me. It was like it was my privilege that he was on my show. And we got halfway through, and he said something that I thought was genuinely interesting, which, by the way, up until that point was a miracle because the rest of it was really boring. But he said something really interesting, and I said to him, "Oh, actually, that's a really good point." I was going to drill down on it, and he goes, "Excuse me, I'm still talking." And I'm like, wow. I'm like, how do I respond to that? I'm like, you just told me off on my own podcast when I'm actually trying to draw stuff out of you because I know my audience. And you got to assume every podcast you're on, the host knows their audience well. That's why they do what they do. So I was like, okay, I'm going to tolerate that. And he kept going. And then he started talking really arrogantly about, people. And he was like, look, this is the problem I have. Most of my clients, like most of your clients, Vince, like most of the people I deal with, they're just morons. And I'm like, wow. And he goes, this is the problem when you're really intelligent. I said, look, I'm just going to stop you. And he goes, I'm still going. I said, no, I need to stop you right now. And he goes, oh, what's happening? I said, I'm canceling this. I said, I'm really sorry. I don't mean to be rude, but you're really arrogant and you're not a good fit for my audience at all. And you're really disrespectful. I'm actually genuinely insulted by the way you've approached this podcast. I then learned a lot of new swear words that he told me. And then he went off and I was just thinking, how was that going to work in his mind? I just don't understand it. So that was one of the worst I had. The other one really was actually turned out to be a client of mine in the end this is not really a fault of their own. So this is not arrogance or anything like that, but they booked the podcast with me and they'd said they had some podcast experience in the past and things as well. And I really liked the angle they were taking on what they were going to share. So they jumped on and then about probably the third question in, I said to them, oh, that's a really good point. I said, so how would you deal with this kind of situation? And he goes, can you please pause? And I went, what? And he goes, can you please pause? I need some time to think about an answer. And I said, oh, well, I do this in one take. I can edit it out. And he goes, oh, yeah, I just need about 5 minutes to think of an answer. And I'm like, oh, wow. And I felt so bad for him. And it was, and he knows this now, but it was a terrible interview. It will never go to air. It was so bad because he lacked any kind of confidence through it. So at the end, I just said to him, look, I'm going to be honest with you. I said, I don't think this is going to work. Like we did, and I do 30 to 40 minute episodes because of my ADHD, but we were on air for an hour and a half and I had probably 15 minutes worth of maybe borderline usable content out of it. So I just said to him, look, is this something that you're really passionate about? And he goes, yes. I said, you really want to get seen in this way? And he goes, yeah. And I said, do you want to get on stage? He goes, yeah, I want to get on stage. I want to do a TEDx talk. I said, great. Well, as you are at the moment, you need a lot of work, but I can point you in the right direction. And he ended up signing with me as a client. He's in my program at the moment and learning how to do all of this kind of stuff, which is great. And he's making massive progress. But then I can also palm him off to someone who I know is a TEDx specialist and things like that as well. So, yeah, so those are some of the horror stories. But the other ones have just been people, although actually one of them was a pseudo horror story, and she won't mind me sharing this because I was messaging one of the guests that I was about to record with, right? So I jumped on a call with them in the past, and I thought, oh, yeah. And then I was booking in the time, and we had to move the time out for some reason. And she sent me this really abrupt message on Facebook and just said, oh, fine, if we have to do that, then I guess we do that. And I was like, wow, okay, she sounds really annoyed. And then she sent me this follow-up one, and again, sounds really abrupt and abrasive. And I was like, oh, man, I just need to check that this is still okay. So I actually jumped on a call with her, and she goes, hey. And I was like, are we okay? And she goes, yeah, we're okay. And it turns out she's German. So the abruptness was just the way she types. She's actually one of the most lovely people ever. But I just interpreted that personally as being aggressive or being abrupt. But in actual fact, she was just joking around with me. So, oh, man, it's been fun.
It's like sometimes you got to throw in the LOL so that way people know you're joking.
Yeah.
Right?
yeah. But good point. LOL, smiley faces, don't care what. Just let me know that was a joke because I'm not reading it as that.
Right. Yes.
It's like the worst one is when they do the opposite of that, where they share something with you that you think is obviously a joke, but it turned out to be really serious, and you're laughing at them. You're like, wow, I'm really insulted. You're like, oh, no.
Not what I meant. I'm sorry. I love what you said about as a host, you want to make sure that the guest sounds good and is good. And like you're showcasing them as an expert. I had one, I'm sure one of my horror stories. I had someone on the show, absolutely loved what she was talking about, but her husband was in the room having his own Zoom call. And in the same time, like,
oh, you're joking. Yeah.
And so the audio, I was like, maybe we can run it through like a repair program or something. But you just hear this baritone voice in the background the whole time. And I was like, that's not going to work. Maybe we'll have her back.
No.
But
I have had one where I wasn't even aware there was an issue at the time. but it was a woman who was wearing, I think you call them bangles.
Yes.
I don't know much about women's jewelry. Bangles around her wrist. And she was talking away and they were clinking on the desk, but my brain tuned them out because it was just background noise. So my brain tuned them out and I wasn't paying attention to it. It wasn't until I listened to the recording that she was talking away and you hear this clang, 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 clang. And it was really embarrassing, but I had to go back to her and say, look, I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to redo that. Turned out it was a good thing because she was like, that wasn't my best work. Oh, you've given me, this is such a good idea. Let's redo the whole thing. So that was cool. I have had the funniest one, actually the funniest two ever. One of them was a woman in Florida and she's just expert on Facebook marketing and things. And I was like, right. So I was chatting away with her and all of a sudden, because we're on video, the whole screen goes white. Everything goes white and there's this like staticky kind of noise. And I was like, what just happened? And then I hear the scream and I'm like, like my heart was racing, everything. And it turned out it was a lightning strike just outside her window. So she was fine, but it gave her such a fright that she screamed and jumped under the table. And I was like, can I please keep the video of this and use this as a blooper? And she went, no. She was so embarrassed. She went, you can't do that. And I was like, okay. And then the other one was just a warning to everyone to make sure that you're wearing pants when you're doing a Zoom call, because I was interviewing someone and while we were talking away, there was a knock at their door and she goes, I'm so sorry. And I said, no, you go grab that. She jumped up, grabbed the door and it was a courier. She looks out, peeks out the door, grabs the parcel, came back, sat down and then went, oh, wait a minute. And I said, I was bright red. I didn't know where to look. And she goes, wait a minute. I'm not wearing pants, am I? I went, no. I'm really embarrassed.
Oh my goodness.
The funniest thing is she's like, oh, well, never mind. And I'm just like, please don't do that again.
Right? Just stay seated.
I was really worried that people would hear me glowing red on the audio. It was that bad. Like I felt like if they were listening to it with headphones, they'd feel the heat radiate into their ears. I don't do well in those situations. I blushed way too easy.
Oh, that's so funny. And you have a horror story also for someone who pitched you on Podmatch, which I've recently joined. I've had some similar interesting experiences. Before you go into that, I'm going to share an email that I got once where it said to Alicia Galati, which is my name, and then it said follow up on potential guest as a guest for the Undraft podcast, which is not my podcast. And then it says, hi, Anya Miller, not my name.
Oh, no. Oh, copy and paste fail.
Obviously, this is not how that works.
No, exactly. What? Oh, my goodness. Yeah. I've got multiple stories from this. Pitching's not that hard. It's difficult, but it's not complex. As in, you've got to try and break through with someone and build a rapport over a message, which is really difficult. And Podmatch, I've had mixed kind of things with. I've actually had some really good guests from Podmatch, but I just had one I was sharing with you before we recorded. I had one, this is just the other day, and it cracked me up. Basically, he just came on to there. I can't remember the exact wording, but it was along the lines of, hi, I'm the best guest you're going to have. I'm the one that's going to blow the mind of your audience. I'm the one that they're going to go, wow. And I was like, okay, sure. But then what he did was he said, I think I'm going to be the perfect fit for your show. So what I want you to do is I want you to look at my profile and come back with 3 reasons why you think I'm going to be the perfect guest for your show. Now, hats off to him for trying to be creative and different, but getting me to do all the work when you're trying to pitch to be on my show, I'm like, you know what? So I replied with just one word, and it was just no, which is a little bit rude, but I was thinking, man, this is just creepy. But the other one I have had a really bad horror story. I've had lots of those copy and paste fails. Mm-hmm. Lots of them where they get the name of the podcast wrong. And it's usually when they're using a podcasting agency or a booking agency. Yeah. It's usually when they're using something like that and they're reaching out to you. And just a tip for you, if you want to be on someone's show, do it personally. And I know some of those booking agencies are going to hate me saying that, but for me personally, I generally don't. I think there's only been once or twice that I've ever taken a referral from someone who's a booking agent. And usually it's because I have a relationship with that person already, or in one case because they actually said that the person really wanted to be on my show. He was a big fan of it. And as soon as I heard the name, I'm like, oh my goodness, is this legit? I feel like I'm being punked here. He really wants to be on my show. And then I can't reveal it yet because he's coming up in an episode. But as soon as I heard that, I was like, yeah. And I jumped on a call with him and he legitimately was a fan. He'd been listening to my podcast for about a year. And I was like, oh man, This is so cool. But the other horror story I have, and this is where you've got to respect the host's, like basically what the host's process is. And the reason for that is the host knows their audience.
Yeah.
Really important. I had a woman who jumped on my show. Now, on my show, I cover off everything for entrepreneurs. So I talk to leaders in marketing and sales and productivity and mindset stuff. I've had nutritionalists and exercise specialists and heart health specialists, but all related to things that are going to help an entrepreneur. So I try and keep it quite pragmatic and quite practical. Now, within that, I have a range of guests that are, some of them are really faith-based, some of them are very woo-woo, some of them are all over the spectrum in that sense. I have no problem with any of that. All of that can come through in your backstory, because I always cover off the backstory of the person. I don't care what you're talking about there. Your story is your story. Make it your own. But as a topic, we don't talk about those things. Mm-hmm. As in, we're not going to talk about how faith impacts this or how woo-woo impacts this. And we had this woman pitched to be on my show, and I jumped in a call with her, and she said, like, here's what I want to do. And before I even really got to talk to her, she goes, here's what I want to do. I want to go live on your show. And I'm thinking, well, it's not a live show, so failure number one, but never mind. And she goes, and I'm going to do a tarot card reading. And what I'm going to do is predict the future of you and your show and all of your listeners. And I went, well, look, I appreciate that. And I said, but here's what I try and do. And I told her about how I try and make it as accessible as possible to everyone. And I said, and immediately that will alienate a large portion of my listeners. And I said, so I'd rather talk about your entrepreneurial journey. But then I was looking at her on the other end of Zoom, and she was shaking and she was fuming. And I'm like, uh-oh.
Oh my goodness.
And she let rip. And she said, how dare you? You are doing your audience an injustice. You know, like you are robbing them of the thing that's going to help them. And, you know, that's so ignorant of you. And I'm like, oh, like I honestly, I felt like apologizing profusely. I'm like, I'm so sorry. And then I went, wait a minute, this is my show. Like, you're pitching to me on my show and you're telling me off. Are you nuts? So I just said to her, look, I said, I know my audience. I know them really, really well. I know what resonates with them and I know what doesn't. And this won't at all. I'm sorry, but you're not a good fit for the show. And we're done. And I was really worried about, you know, because I'm a people pleaser. So you're really worried that they go off and tell other people and they get really annoyed. But then I was talking to another podcast and they said, oh, I had this woman on there want to do a live tarot thing. She was nuts. And I went, oh, Phil. So she was doing the rounds. So just respect the process. It's really important. If there's certain topics that are no-go or certain topics they want to talk about, you need to be prepared for that.
Yes, 100%. Oh my goodness. This has been so much fun. Thank you so much, Vince, for being on the show. If you could tell everyone where they can listen to your show, hang out with you online, buy your books, all of that fun stuff.
Oh man, I make it real easy. Just go to chasingtheinsights.com. So that's my website. That's the home of my podcast, of course, and it'll have links to all your favorite platforms you can listen to the podcast on. It's also the home of my book and my upcoming books as well. Most importantly, it has two things on there. One is a link to all my social media profiles. So unless you're a spammer, connect with me everywhere because I love meeting new people. There's also a link there for a free strategy call. So if anyone's having any issues in marketing or trying to make sense of it all, or you just need to run something past someone, just book a free strategy call with me and I would love to help you. So chasingtheinsights.com, super duper simple.
And we'll have the link for that in the show notes. Again, thank you so much, Vince.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Listeners to Leads. If you found something in this episode valuable, I would really appreciate it if you shared it with a friend who you know would also get value from it. Want to send me a message? My favorite place to hang out is Instagram. You can find me at alicia.galati. Let me know what your favorite takeaway was from the episode. And don't forget, turning those listeners into leads is actually easy.